Good morning. My name is Reg Hunter. I'm with Fiatech. Today's productivity advancement target discussion is focused on how owners can go about understanding the sources and needs that situations that causes change orders to take place and how they can go about systematically reducing those change orders. Hopefully all of you are aware of what productivity improvement advancement targets are that were generated by Fiatech. I have a few slides about that. They're actually a very unique way to come at economic driven productivity improvements for the industry, very oriented to uh, monetary implications of why do you care about productivity? Why do you care about these new technologies and systems? And so this is really not meant to be like a webinar presentation. It's more of a discussion. So at any time, if any of you have any questions or comments or want to clarify something, please don't hesitate to just to make me pause here and answer, or we'll get someone else on the call here to answer. So there's a number of articles. I think I've sent links to everyone about it that relate to this. They're published in E&R and Built Worlds that talk in depth about what we're doing and why we're doing it. And I think one of the core things that take away in these articles was we posed the question that with all these great technologies, augmented reality, virtual reality, visualization tools, RFID, I mean, you name it, how come our industry hasn't had a substantial improvement in productivity? It sort of defies logic to some extent. And we put forward the argument that with the specialization that takes place, the technologies help to facilitate greater and greater specialization, but it's at the expense of having organizations and stakeholders within a project become much more inwardly focused, saying we're only responsible for what we can change and what we have to do. We really have no control over these externalities, so therefore we don't really care. It's up to someone else. And so you have these sort of this isolationist mentality that causes efficiency to sort of be lost with respect to overall project execution and performance. I think most of us will agree and already know that better than 50% of all capital projects overrun on cost and schedule. And so clearly we can debate the merits of a technology, but our current approach to dealing with technologies and embracing technologies in the fabric of how we execute our projects is not really working. And so these two articles kind of address that. And if you haven't seen them, please send me an email. I'll send you the link to them. But I think this will help you and your organization to help you better understand what we're doing and why. There's really three different productivity advancement targets that relate to owners specifically, and one of the things that we've determined is that it's up to us Fiatech members to help owners understand what's going on in the industry and what's going on with respect to project execution to help them be more proactively engaged in helping to drive productivity for not only themselves but the industry. So this productivity advancement target is number 2. It's through process improvements, achieve 70% reduction in change order in owner initiated change orders. And if you look at that 70%, it's astounding. I mean, you have to almost pause and think about it. Somebody says 70%. But what's really interesting, I was hoping that Saul would be on this call. He's in California, so he's probably still sleeping. But Saul and Era Energy got up and said, we've already achieved it. And you can imagine that he was sort of the hero of the conference because he described how their methodology that they went through to incrementally decompose the problem and systematically reconstruct a solution that allowed them to maintain their 3D model in lockstep with the as-built configuration. And Rebecca, I think you mentioned how many pipe spools? I get the numbers wrong, so if you can turn yourself off mute, there's something like 18,000 pipe spools that he installed, and there's only like 6 or 7 of them that had problems or something like that.
I think it was about 15,000, or maybe it was 50,000. Now you caught me. I've got to go back through my notes. So 15,000. It was 15,000 connections, and there were 5-dimensional bus out of that. So that's pretty amazing.
I mean, that's just, and so you started saying, well, this isn't like a theoretical thing. This isn't a solution provider talking point. This has actually been done. And he talked about the rigors they went through to keep the 3D model in lockstep with as-built and continually validating the dimensional information as soon as is economically feasible early on and looking at its impact on the overall 3D model. and they basically took the stance that they've achieved 70% reduction. So the trick is how do you go about really understanding how are they able to do that, how they're able to change their culture to drive in that direction. He points out that this was a single couple cases, but they're using it as sort of the flagship to move forward. So you could see how that would be a great discussion to have, like at our leadership forum, about, okay, well, how did you go about implementing it? Now, there's a little short video that's available in our Slack owner-initiated change order site that you can watch where Saul talks about it. And obviously, he has bigger presentations and things like that. So are there any questions or comments about this? Okay. And you'll see in a minute, I'll explain what success enablers are for those of you that are unfamiliar with this topic. There are essentially 8 leadership initiatives within Fiatech, and you can see them in the wide chevrons on this page and the next page. And there's actually 12 productivity enabling. Oh, I missed one here. Yeah, and there's 12 productivity advancement targets that relate to that. So the first 3 are industry owners and operators. Today's discussion is going to be patent number 2. The next 2 relate to project management and design and so on. And with respect to each one of those, you see these percentages. These percentages are not specific to an organization. These percentages are related to the expectations that the industry could achieve as a whole. So, some companies may be excellent at something while other ones aren't. And so this really is sets the reasonable expectations from a performance standpoint for the industry in aggregate, or certainly with respect to industry segments like chemical plants, things like that, or refineries, things like that. So that's how you kind of look at those numbers, and it's a little bit of a problem because I just mentioned that it's economically driven. How do you translate these percentages into something that you can internalize within your organization? And I'll talk a little bit about that in a second. But anyway, we went through and looked at all these things. We had over 60 or more subject matter experts that said, well, if you really were able to pull this off, how much better could you be? How much better could we as an industry be? And these percentages came from them. And so we said, okay, that's great. You said 70%, or you said 55%. How would you do that? And so we started decomposing it and saying, well, you'd have to do this. And we started delineating all the characteristics associated with an organization that's a leading edge organization, and we describe them as success enablers. And so these attributes, which is like behaviors that an organization has, is actually the indicators that allow an organization to embrace and achieve these performance improvements. So a couple of days ago, we ran an integrated material management discussion, and it went great. I think, Bob, you've had some for emerging systems and technology. I think there's also been some I think all of them have had target team discussions.
Correct.
So I like this graphic. It's probably the reason that it sticks around so long. But so we've really developed a composite of expertise to identify the productivity advancement targets potentials. And then so we kind of know what's needed, especially when you think about, well, here's all the success enablers that are associated with that. So we said, well, that's good. And then you start looking at the success enablers in particular, and you start realizing that, well, this already exists. Some organization may have it. Dow may have it, Air Energy may have it, a solution provider may have it. So you start coming to the realization that the success enablers are not pie in the sky. The success enablers are already integrated into our industry in various places, but they've never been aggregated into a form that unifies activities driven at achieving an overall performance improvement. And so it's like we have all the pieces to the puzzle, but we're not really putting it together. And what this really represents from Fiatech here is a unified effort to find the pieces to the puzzle and then assemble it into some usable form that helps drive the industry forward in a sustainable way. So having gone through all that, it becomes clear that at the end of the day, the owners are the ones carrying the weight of performance challenges and shortcomings. And so it's up to us as an industry to help owners really understand what the implications are of their expectations and how their expectations is either facilitating improvement or really just another activity that incurs costs but has questionable value at the end of the day. So with that in mind, what we did is we set up these voice of the owner sessions that are open to any owner. So if you're an owner and you're watching this, or you would like to access this voice of the owner Slack site, which I'll be talking about, you're welcome to do that. I'll send you the link and you can log into it. But what it does is it gives you the history of various discussions that have taken place by owners, and it's owners talking to owners about what they plan. Like for example, on number 7, hang on. So like number 4, and talking to DuPont before they were, I guess, acquired by Dow, and talking to them, they were saying, yeah, sometimes when we ask for these deliverables, we actually degrade the performance of the contract. So in other words, if you keep asking for a lot of things, you actually you think you might be ensuring project performance, but what you might actually be doing is degrading overall project execution. It's this balloon bulging between your fingers. And so how do you strike a balance with that? So that's an interesting discussion that we had recorded that's available on the Slack site that's coming up. And then you can talk about paradigm shifts to realize integrated material management. Deb, thank you. She made a presentation to the other owners about how do you improve, what Dow's plans are to improve project performance and so on. You got fraudulent material from Phillips 66. So this is sort of a smorgasbord of dialogue has taken place between owners so they can share their perspectives and experience and and uh, and hopes and expectations kind of thing. And so I'll give you a really quick example. One of the things we were talking about was residual material at the end of a construction cycle, and the owner said we view residual material as gross mismanagement of materials on a project. And then you go to talk to an EPC that's executing projects and you ask them about residual material, and they say, well, we don't have that view at all. Our view is that anytime we starve the craft from having the materials they need to be able to execute production and construction at the work face is a gross mismanagement. So it's the same coin, but there's two different views, right? And depending on the circumstances, both views are correct, but they're kind of different. The motivation's different. I don't know, Debbie, do you have any comments about any of these?
Yeah, so just on that one in particular, right, I think both sides are valid, and I think what the industry needs is just joint conversations around where's the sweet spot, right? Because there is a sweet spot. I think the owners need to appreciate the value destroyed if materials are not available, but then the EPCs need to really understand the major headaches the owner has at the end of the project when we have fields of material that we don't need, that we don't want to bring into our maintenance receiving. So there is a sweet spot that needs to be discussed in the industry, so both objectives can be met.
Yeah, and I think that the advanced work packaging and all these different things are trying to reduce the blurring between the entities and clarify things, because if you have the visibility and predictability, you actually have awareness of what's going on. So for example, if you're paranoid about pipe spools not being available and you decide you just as a precaution you'll order more spools from some other supplier, well, what you're really doing is you're hedging against the likelihood of a performance deficiency on the part of one pipe spool supplier and hedging your bet by having it from someplace else. But if you have the visibility and predictability and information flow that you really trusted, you may not necessarily do that all the time. Okay, any other questions or comments?
I think just that the idea of the PATs being made up of owners, EPCs, solution providers, and academics is exciting, right? Because it definitely is a joint conversation needed to solve the issues the industry faces. So it's exciting.
Yeah, it's actually fascinating if you think about it. And I'm really not just saying this. That when you, like, for example, at the annual conference and the leadership forum, you have peers sitting across the table from each other, and you can see it's really hard when there's breaks and lunch times and so on. It's hard to get people out of the discussion environment because they're saying, well, we tried that didn't work. The problem was this, and you go like, oh my gosh, we're on the verge of trying that. And I was a long time ago before I was with Fiatech. I was out at a construction site and I was talking to some EPC and I was saying, look, there's a whole problem with these handhelds. They don't really support visibility in daylight. And they started looking at me and asking questions. And I said, it has to do with transreflectance. And to have a handheld device, you need to be able to have visibility. He says, yeah, we just bought 200 handheld devices that we can't even see the screens in broad daylight. It's like, oh man. So I mean, Fiatech can't push a specific solution. They can describe the problem and the things to be looking out for and checklists for what to consider when you're evaluating a new technology and solutions. But it's only when you're sitting across from other people that have gone through the same process, can explain why they did what they did and what they found out, do you really avoid missteps. And I think that's pretty important. So these are the companies right now that I've set up for Voice of the Owner that can have access. Anyone within these organizations can have access to this Voice of the Owner site to see the previous discussions that I showed on the previous slide. And so it's all available in Slack and it's open to any owner organization. So if you don't you see yourself here and you really want to go look at these discussions, please let me know and I'll add you and send an invite.
Reg, are these also available to Fiatech members?
No, this is that
weird. The Voice of the Owner.
This is like, well, we did move the one over where Deb was talking about the cost implications, the cost avoidance implications associated with those percentages. They're not available directly, but if we're actively pursuing a project and you're saying, well, I really want to understand this, then I can go ahead and get permission to go ahead and do it because everyone's talking. There's no one ever talks about money. Everyone's very good for not talking about money and in aggregating strategies, those antitrust kind of vulnerabilities, but they are just talking to each other. Actually, I don't talk hardly at all in these things. And so, but if you see some and you want to talk to me about how do you get access to it, because it helps drive the solutions in the rest of the productivity advancement targets, I don't see any reason why I wouldn't be able to do it. We just didn't want to do it across the scale and have all these different people participating, be exposed to a bunch of interactions. Does that make sense?
Okay,
Rebecca,
thanks.
I think one of the opportunities really is to get the EPC firms talking to each other also, right?
Yeah.
And be able to talk candidly without the owners, and then again agree, like Reg just said, intentionally agree on where the conversation has value to have it together, right? So there's a line there. I think we just need to find and work our way through, but I'm sure the solution providers wouldn't mind getting together and discussing the challenges they face trying to come into this industry. So there's perhaps individual group conversations and then joint conversations within the PAT itself, right?
Yeah, that's true. That's true. All right.
I expect PAT number 2 to be owners, EPCs, and solution providers engaged in solving the problem, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's a good example. I think I'll say it now because I might forget later. There's an example about ripple effect associated with change order, and there's EPCs have models that apparently allow them to weigh the complexity of the change, the time in the life cycle of the project when the change took place, what happened with respect to change to influencing activities and augmenting all the information associated with supporting the change. And it comes to, so they run this model and they're able to come up with numbers. And they were saying, well, look, this is, one of the things we do is that we don't really like change orders either, although people might not agree with us or believe us, but we don't. But whenever we come back with costing associated with the change to the project, to the client, they think we're stuff in the ballot box, kind of, where we're increasing the cost just to make more money. And we're really not. And so, but they don't inherently, in the fact that we're providing this information, they react to us and don't believe us. And so you could see a scenario with respect to Fiatech where you have the impact of ripple effect change orders, where you aggregate multiple models that are used by multiple different EPCs to price out change orders. You don't load it with numbers because you can't do that, but you say this is the kinds of influences and kind of activities that surround a change order that gets costed in. Then, if it comes out of Fiatech, then you basically have sort of this independent broker that provides a solution. So any owner or any EPC can use this tool, for example, to essentially anticipate the impact of a change order and decide whether or not it seems to be in line with the cost that they receive from the EPC for the change. Does that make sense? So I won't read all these things, but basically we really are wanting to encourage owners and stakeholders to think about what your company hopes to achieve. And the reason for that is that you need to be acting in your own self-interest. If it's an interesting thing to be doing, and it's a hassle compared to your day in and day out job, then you maybe want to have someone else in your organization that's more directly responsible for doing these things be involved. Because what you really should think about is that all of these success enablers are really have deliverables and have intent, and people are working on it. It's the challenge is just figuring out who is. At the end of the day, I think that the reduction in change orders, if you were to simplify it, I think it has to do with how do you go about increasing visibility, predictability, and attaining positive control. Um, by the way, if you haven't viewed the Slack PAT number 2 environment, please review the success enablers as soon as you get a chance. Now, I have a slide coming up on number 4 here, but one of the things that came up from one of the owners was they were requesting, saying, look, here's a spreadsheet that shows all these success enablers, and here's a column that how we feel about how our posture looks with respect to the success enablers. And you can't share that with anyone because it's just an internal discussion within our organization. And it was good. I mean, it was fascinating actually. But we realized that we have to have an environment where a Fiatech member or an owner or anyone else can have a candid discussion internally before they go and have a discussion through the Fiatech Slack environments. And I think, Rebecca, you kind of are doing something similar to that. And also, Deb, I think you are with Dow. Yeah. So the bottom line is that how do we go, we really need to figure out how to get people actively involved in refining and developing solutions to the owner change orders, success enablers, and then encourage everyone that we can to attend the leadership forum next month, where we'll have very high power work group sessions that are devoted to all of the productivity advancement targets. So it's kind of hard to this looks a little bit like a carnival, and I apologize. In one respect, it's sort of flashy, but it's like looking at blinking lights. You can't really comprehend it very clearly. But what we're attempting to show here is that there's Fiatech leadership initiatives, as you see on the left, which is the 8 characteristics, and within each one of those initiatives, there's sets of productivity advancement targets that were generated. There's 12 of them. And from that, within those targets, in aggregate, there's over 400 success enablers. And then we took those percentages that were expectations that were identified and said, well, what does this impact? What is the economic reality of what we could expect to happen in the industry as a whole? And that's where we came up with the 33% decrease in cost and 10% faster. That's a profound number. I mean, it's sort of like, even if you could get 15% decrease in cost, that would be spectacular. Now, again, this relates to the industry, not to the specific company. So the trick is, with respect to the specific company, is to be able to come up with a way to decompose how the projects are taking place, where the costs are incurring, and then to what extent the success enablers will address that. So where we are right now is migrating from what it's worth, we know what it could be worth, into how do we go about getting there. And so to do that, and this is what Deb was talking about, is we really need to unify owners and operators, EPCs, the whole collage of stakeholders in the industry focused on achieving and satisfying the success enablers and reducing it to practice and ensuring adoption. Oops, sorry. So I touched on it, and hopefully I'll just to be really clear. The 33% decrease in cost and 10% faster relates to the industry in aggregate. For an individual organization, they may excel at something and have challenges in other areas. So depending on that, certain success enablers are more applicable to them. So they have to go through a process of decomposing that and identifying that. We identified that issue in our change readiness team discussion last week, where we need to come up with a way for a organization to essentially extract and express their cost allocations associated with project phase and types of work taking place and things like that into some sort of modeling tool. And then they look at it and say, oh, hey, most of our variability is coming from this, and variability is costing us this, and a success enabler should be identified within all these PATs that relate to that. And that's what we need, because we know this is where we're hemorrhaging money. There's many different attempts in the past to help people understand what this is all about, and the best that I could come up with, I guess, was that you have a high performing organization really sort of has a fingerprint of behaviors and practices, and that fingerprint is really composed of techniques and practices that they've implemented over time. Okay, and it's sort of it's sort of the indication of whether or not a company is a high performance company. And when you don't have those particular attributes and success enablers, those are the times that you run the risk of not being able to embrace and adopt or even recognize productivity improvements. Okay, so the analogy, I think it makes sense, and it's in those articles, is that you really have, with respect to productivity advancement target teams within Fiatech, you have two kinds of leaders. You have the owners, which obviously have a vested interest and highly motivated to achieve these performance improvements because it's economically driven. But you also have co-leaders, which are the EPCs that have the detailed understanding, the network of relationships with stakeholders that are able to understand and say, well, if we were to pull off this, we need to be able to do this. If we do this, we need to get these guys involved. It's kind of like interactive project planning. And so you have to have co-leaders that are EPCs with the in-depth knowledge and relationships to execute the project, but you have to have owners also be the catalyst for change. The analogy continuing here is that you can view success enablers like these are expectations of what would be reasonable for a high performance organization to achieve, and virtually actually no organization has all these success enablers. But this is what I was talking about. In aggregate, the information by and large is probably 75% of the industry already knows the solutions to these, but solutions can come from a variety of places. They can come from the industry, or they can come from Fiatech projects and Fiatech members and things like that. So hopefully that's clear. Oops, sorry. So people think we're being that we aren't open. This is really an open playing field. Okay, it's like a success enabler which describes some need in that to achieve the performance improvement. Solutions to that can come from anywhere. It doesn't matter, as long as there could be like 4 different solutions to the same success enablers from 4 different places. And some of them would match into the chemical industry, some will map into the oil and gas, some will map into just housing and retail store type stuff. The solutions can come from anywhere. And so the trick is that a success enabler is not like independent little flashes of projects within Fiatech. The success enabler is really a collage of experience and expertise and technologies that we're gathering from the entire industry. So with respect to what anyone who's viewing this should do is I think that they should log into the PATS, the Slack that I'll talk about in a second, look through the success enablers, think about what they do in their organization where they essentially provide a service or a solution to a success enabler, or they identify where they have limitations that are causing costs to take place that they can't control, and identify those as touch points. And those are the kinds of things that saying, look, there's 30 things here, but actually these 5 are the most important to us right now because we don't have these skills, or we don't have this knowledge, or we don't have an understanding of what's involved. Any questions on that? So
I think my only advice to folks is that if you're truly trying to drive project productivity within your company, it's a multifunctional conversation, right? Purchasing, construction, engineering, business, everybody sort of needs to be in the conversation to say, where are we really and what are we missing to truly get the total potential value? Because what I do is I see the industry has pockets of excellence. What we're hoping to do here in the PATS is really compile that in such a way that the owner doesn't have to go search the whole world, right? They can come here and say, okay, I'm ready to tackle problem number 1. Here's what the industry knows about it, and here's who knows, so that the conversation, the speed to get to the conversation with the right knowledge is shortened dramatically. And also, I think that we put it in the right context, because I think that's what we're missing, right? We're all overwhelmed with information. The question is, how do you get the information you need at the time you need it. So that's what we're really hoping the PAT success enabler structure will give the industry.
Yeah, it can be overwhelming, but if it was easy, we would have already done it, and so it's heartening to look at the success enablers, because you can say, well, look at all these. There's 30 of them. How can you have so many? Well, because who's involved, in what way they're involved, and how they influence and affect each other is very complicated, right? And that's really one of the challenges our industry faces. And so to not, in other words, I would be more concerned about a productivity advancement target with 3 success enablers, like the success enabler saying, how can you do a better job? Well, what good is that? You have to have something more substantive and more clear. So it's kind of an interesting dilemma to have fidelity, but at the same time not intimidate people. So just real quick here on what the cultivating process is for solution is that within these productivity advancement target working groups, you actually have a process where you're looking at the success enablers like we've been talking about. You clarify what the industry needs are, what the value is. You kind of baseline saying this is what it's costing us now without these solutions. You start refining the success enablers, and this could be internal to each organization, saying this is by far the most important thing to us than these other ones, even though those are good, we already have them handled. And then start identifying potential solutions, and then work with solutions providers or researchers or the like, and start communicating with the industry, saying, look, this is, and you come out of the gate saying, we might have a webinar, and say, look, this is a performance baseline. This is the nature of how the industry does these things now in general terms. And then here's an overview of a potential solution to that. And then these are the things to consider of what would make why this potential solution is viable or not. And what you're really doing is you're chumming the water here to see what other expertise exists in the industry to say, yeah, you're right, that looks pretty good, but it's not quite right, it's this. So you still, even though we're from Fiatech, you still want to reach out in a holistic way to the rest of the industry to try to identify the subject matter experts that have a vested interest in these assumptions and these strategies going forward, because their input also needs to be incorporated into the mindset as you move forward. So with that information, you start looking back within the patent group, and you start collecting the industry views, and you refine the enablers still further. And then you start doing detailed analysis of various solutions and their viability. And then from there, you sort of either identify follow-on work or closeout. So you may generate a Fiatech project that needs to be done to resolve and reconcile the strategies, or you may actually just say, this has already been done. It's fundamentally looks like this. And document it in the Slack environment so people can go and review it and then move on to the next most important pressing thing. So these slides I'm going to upload in PDF into our Slack environment, but this is an interesting, I'm sorry it's a little bit busy, but it's really a capturing of, in this case it's integrated material management, it's a capturing of the success enablers, but more importantly, it shows you the environment that allows you to essentially select on, here you can select an integrated material management or change orders or something like that. You can see all the success enablers, and you can provide comments and perspectives in that environment. So anyone who's signed into the environment, a Fiatech member, can go and read the dialogue that's taking place, can essentially offer their perspectives, or they can look at the dialogue and internally within their organization go back and look at it. So this is really a social media kind of thing. You basically can have groups of people involved and stuff. You can upload information into it. You can message and communicate privately with individuals saying, well, that's not right. You really need to think about this. And it's really the collaborative backbone of what we're talking about. I'm certainly not good at social media. I've never sent a tweet in my life. I barely know how to say that. But it gives you, so we started this up about a month ago, maybe a month and a half. But we just couldn't do the spreadsheet type approach because there's so much interaction, there's so much interdependencies, and there's so much experience that might slip through our fingers that we don't even see. This lets you capture all of that. Other people use different tools. I don't know to what extent they do the same functions of this. I did, by the way, with respect to Voice of the Owner, I did set it up in SharePoint. It was an administrative nightmare to help people get in and out of it, and it didn't have the clarity of and consistency of structure that this does. So Slack, if you go to slack.com, you can look at their demonstration videos and explanation. Slack doesn't cost you anything to go into it. There's links that let you sign up for any of these. There's an application that you can wake up on your Mac or your PC to let you essentially put all of these productivity advancement targets on icons on the left-hand side, and you can just go through each one of them. And so what's interesting, it's kind of funny, you can start off the morning like I do with a cup of coffee, looking at the different conversations that are taking place in these different productivity advancement targets and provide comments on it or whatever. But there's a notification when something's been changed. So you can see how by doing that, you're able to start harvesting people's experience, knowledge, and perspectives and passion. So if you these slides will be available, as I said before, but if you want to have the links again sent to you, I'll be happy to send them to you. So the richness of information that you can store into these Slack environments is complete, I think. So for example, we've implemented these video awareness videos. So into PAT 2, which is owner-initiated change order reduction, we have a video from Saul, which I talked about, where they've achieved in air energy the 70% reduction target. There's another video about why changes take place from academia. And then there's a video that we're still trying to get together with respect to the ripple cost effect. And I think, Deb, you pointed out that what's interesting about this is you see a good example of the breadth of how you reach into this bucket of our industry and get experience from academia. You get experience from actual people doing actual work responsible for delivering performance, and you get information from EPCs that are responsible for developing and executing projects. And so in aggregate, what you really are seeing is a much more complete, much more focused vision of what's going on. Any comments, Deb?
No, I mean, I think this is an area that we at Dow are very interested in, right? We're actually putting a new change management system in, and we're beginning to use this information to say, are we looking at it holistically enough, and what's the next generation, right? If we get the basic need met, then what do we want to be able to add on to it? And again, it impacts both work process change, cultural change conversations, and also, technology or solution selection conversations. So I think having the multiple perspectives is very important. And then validating it with your partners, right? And it initiates conversation, both within your organization and with your partners. So good stuff.
Yeah, and for those of you that aren't familiar with change readiness, it's been one of the underpinnings of all of this. And it relates to the fact that no matter how good of technology you have or how promising the proof of concept evaluation you might have performed in your organization, by the time you have a project that should be using it 3 or 4 projects down the road, there's better than a 70% likelihood you won't use it, and people reverted back to what they did before. So there's this whole issue about how do you sustain innovation and how do you encourage it to be adopted. So there's a number of things we've done. We've essentially conducted a survey of the industry where we looked at how people felt about changes and what they viewed for why the changes were effective or not. And they talked about the specific type of productivity improvement or enhancement project that they're looking at. And it's really an eye opener about, you may think people are on board with the change. You may think the change is fundamentally self-explanatory and obvious. And then you can turn away and in 3 months come back and see it's gone. Okay. And so that's just the reality of the nature of the data that we're generating. And so the idea here is that we develop tools that allow you to essentially profile your organization's experience with respect to change, which helps you gauge the receptiveness the organization has, who would be the early adopters and the change agents. Another tool would allow you to anticipate the response to a change that you're considering deploying, so that you can take steps to ensure that it has a fast track for adoption or critical review. And then there's also a fourth tool which has to do with how do you want to be able to monitor that the change is being evaluated in a consistent way and systematic way to move forward, so that you can ensure that it's a sustained adoption takes place. You don't really want it to die on the vine. You really want to make sure that you are able to harvest the crop of improvements. So I'll just kind of paraphrase this. This is an example of a success enabler that was identified. That we were talking about how do you go establishing baselines associated with handling and movement of materials on an enterprise basis within a project. And the question was, is that, well, to before you start thinking about productivity improvement and product enabling technologies and all these things, you really need to be able to baseline where costs are manifesting and how costs are manifesting and what is it about the behaviors and things like that are causing that to occur. And so there was a response back that we got from an individual that's a member, and he pointed out that they have tools that are being used in the automotive industry that lets them anticipate the cost of materials that are going to be placed in a car, and it's based on a model that looks at the type of material and where it's procured from and its complexity and its material types and things like that. And that's not quite like what I was saying, but it's actually an interesting feature. And so the discussion was maybe we should make some short videos about that. And then Deb came back and said that she wants to see some cost models and how do you go about capturing cost of activities. And I'm not yet to see any response back. This went out just a few days ago, but you could I have some ideas with respect to influence diagrams of how are you able to visualize all the cost, break down the cost using this environment to be able to show the dependencies of the uncertainties involved in execution of a project. But then you do that because what it does is it gives you visibility in how you're doing things now. So when a new technology emerges or a solution that could be relevant, you aren't trying to push it if you're a solution provider. You as an owner or an EPC are wanting to pull the technology into your operations because you see its merits, because you understand your current inefficiencies and how costs are manifesting. So influence diagrams, if over the next few weeks, if we don't have some good substantive inputs from the solution providers and so on, we might start a Fiatech project that talks about influence diagrams as a way to depict the activities surrounding material movement and capture the cost there.
Yes, I think on that, Reg, for example, we're having an internal conversation in Dow around what does integrated materials management mean to us. Where does it start and where does it end, and what does it need to accomplish? And I think even seeing anyone's cost model would help us understand how other people are defining that, right? Sort of what's in, what's out, and because I think we're on the learning curve, right? We definitely have material specification pretty well linked down. We have actual procurement linked down. What we're really trying to say is how does the data flow and get all the other things we need, right? Which is prediction of delivery and linkage to advanced work packaging, so we know construction has the materials they need and stuff. So we're really looking at how to find folks who already have that or have a piece of that, and are willing to talk about it and help us really understand, what does integrated materials management mean to others, and then thereby we can define what does an integrated materials management mean here in Dow. So it's also helps drive alignment, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, and this really underscores the point, I think, throughout this, is that you can have these isolated things like, well, my dashboard comes up and shows me how many purchase orders what our purchase order let rate is based on complexity. Well, that's just a small snapshot of the overall challenge here, right? And so at the end of the day, you want to have your refinery or whatever it is. Everything has to work in lockstep to be able to do that. And anything that comes up short of that is actually a way that you will not be successful. Okay. And so thinking in isolation of just one segment of the supply network or whatever it is you're dealing with, why change orders take place, isn't enough. I mean, that's kind of how we've done it in the past. It's interesting. I mean, it's kind of fun to play with the technology, and it's bounded because it's just a straightforward, simple problem, but you're not engaging the right stakeholders. You're not understanding the interdependencies with externalities that have to be considered to be successful. So with that in mind, these are some examples with respect to material management, but that's not one of them is, the other one isn't. So there's this document that I guess I wrote a couple years ago that relate to how do you go about understanding from a holistic standpoint how to approach productivity improvement. And so it lets you decompose your process, understand sources of variability, costing sources of variability, and essentially lay out a productivity improvement plan. And actually, this came from a book that I co-authored with Todd Sutton. But what I did some work a long time ago for Chevron, and what they wanted to do is ask an EPC is, what is your productivity improvement plan, and have you identified all the tasks that you're going to do, and where are you on that schedule? Because they say when they've issued in the past purchase orders or RFIs or whatever, they would ask for it and they would get these kind of marketing response like, we've been involved in CII for the last 10 years and Fiatech for the last 5 years. And then the project would be given to them, and invariably they would run into problems and the execution would come up short from what was expected. So this is unfortunately, it's a fairly long document. It's 100 pages or so, but it's quite fascinating, I think, to me anyway, reading, because it helps you see how complicated everything is, and it helps you convert to economic terms what inefficiencies are. And on the right-hand side is it's a project that we executed at Fiatech, finished up about a year and a half ago, and it relates to an alternative to just using KPIs. KPIs, as most of us know, essentially you can look at the ratio of something to something else with respect to what's been done in the past, and it kind of gives you a feeling for trending and what could be happening. But if you think about what you're really doing is you're taking a very small thing and you're hoping these 2 things or 3 things are indicative of what's going on, and that, I don't think that's true for the most part. And then you couple that with advanced work packaging, which is much more disciplined, much more look ahead, and you realize that you need something better to help you manage performance than something that tells you the status of what's going on now. You need something that tells you what's going to happen in the future. And so we launched a project called Predictive Performance Analysis, and call it Predictive Performance Indicators, where you actually can take up to 20 different components associated with data that's being generated, look at how those components interact with each other, and anticipate the likelihood of future events. And we trained it using some material stuff, some information associated with material movement on a huge mega project, and we were able to show that we could anticipate the likelihood of something like a pipe spool order being late by 6 months, and we could anticipate it 8 months ahead of time. So what's important about being able to see the future is that you can say, well, that's unacceptable. And you can go in and take proactive action. So you haven't really incurred the loss and the delay of the pipe spool delivery. You actually know that it's on the horizon based on historical behaviors. And you can say, well, that's unacceptable. I need to send a team out right now, or I need to essentially challenge the supplier to show cause on how he's actually going to fix this, because right now I'm 80% confident they aren't going to deliver. Really quite fascinating, really quite leading edge, but totally technically correct. Almost done. Only got about 3 more slides. So we recognize, and I mentioned this early on, that we recognize that organizations really want and need to have candid discussions with respect to the productivity advancement targets. And so what we've done is we've set up an environment that takes our Slack performance advancement targets and converts them into an environment that can be imported. So any organization can take these files, create their own internal Slack environment, and have dialogue within their organization. So you can have a conversation with your new product development people, for example, saying, well, we don't really believe this is important, but we think this is important. We understand this is sort of where our comfort zone is, and this is where we bring real good value to the industry. And you can kind of use this environment as a way to assess your maturity level and your product offerings, and maybe even your strategic plans going forward. And out of that, you can have a situation saying, well, look, we need to clarify this. So we'll get back with the PAT teams, the Fiatech PAT teams, and clarify the success enabler or articulate a solution for evaluation. Almost done. Is there any questions on that slide?
I think it's a really good feature. It'll help us sort of stay synced up internally and externally.
Yeah, I think it, and Deb, I mean, you showed me some stuff. I just think that's the most incredible power. I mean, I'm obviously hyping here, but I really think it's candid, right? You can say, I've never really understood why we do this. And someone say, oh, we did this because we just always done it that way. We don't really know why. And it could be other reasons, like we do this because it's contractually required for government, who knows? But it lets you essentially converge people's mindsets and people's experience and expertise, but you don't have to expose it to the industry like you would through the Fiatech patent environment. You just expose it to yourself. So what you're really doing is unifying people's within your organization's experience and knowledge and expertise and perspective. So you get them on board that way. So at the Leadership Forum, which is next month, hopefully you can come. Where the idea, there's multiple breakout sessions. There's one for change order, owner-initiated change orders. In that session, we'd like to have a discussion about what is the vision and status. What do we see as the hurdles and opportunities, and how do we go about baselining and ensuring that the building inertia to move forward, and then how do we get more owners and more EPCs involved in developing solutions. This is almost, it's the second to last line. So with respect to owner-initiated change orders to reduce that by 70%, we really need to make sure that we identify which owners are the leaders of this path. And by leaders, I mean not just watch it, but be motivated because they want to reduce change orders because they see that it's a huge cost problem. Okay, so they need to be acting in their own self-interest, and EPCs as well. We need both owners and co-owners identified to drive this forward. We also need to make sure that we understand and set priority strategies and what next steps are needed. If you're not involved in this specifically, if there's someone within your organization that's more directly involved in it or some other discipline within your organization that should be involved, please let us know. We'll include them in the distribution going forward. Encourage them to sign into the Slack environment and review the success enablers in order to identify the appropriate touch points that benefit your organization, you as individually. And then I just encourage you again to attend the Fiatech Leadership Forum next month. And we're getting close. I think that's it. Yeah. And so this is just I'm not going to read it all, but this is some information about it. It's in New Orleans, just to point out people are a little bit skittish about Louisiana right now because of all the floods. And I've confirmed that the floods are not affecting this hotel facility. It's a beautiful facility. It's walking distance to Bourbon Street or whatever. And it's if you just go to the website, the Marriott website, and you look at the pictures, and if you're on the fence about whether or not you should go, I think that might make the difference to you. In addition, obviously, the discussions that take place that are going to take place with the productivity advancement teams is extremely important, and I think you'll gain a lot out of it. So that, unless someone has some questions, I mean, that's all I have. Is there any other questions or comments?
I have a very general question about this change order PAT. Are we looking? I know from some of the conversations, and particularly the video that Era created, the effort or the savings were looked at very much in the construction phase. But do you see it being kind of segmented or a broader discussion overall about all phases of a project execution plan to look for where we can save, from the contract management to the engineering execution as well as the construction management?
Well, hopefully the success enablers broaden do that for you. I mean, for example, if you can't one of the problems that happens with change, and there's tons of problems. It's just amazing all of the brainstorming that went on about this. One of the problems is that the customer, because within an owner's organization, they also have a customer that's going to be responsible for ongoing operations, and they'll say, well, that scaffolding looks pretty good at 3 feet. And then they start seeing when the building's taking place, they go and visit the facility and they kind of walk around the partial built facility and they realize that crap, this is way too narrow, or I can't access this valve manifold to be able to do servicing. And they start issuing change orders, which is really killer bad and expensive. Okay. And so the hope is that, how do you engage? And I think I bet you anything, there's a success enabler for this, but how do you ensure that the people taking ownership of the facility that you're building are able to visualize what's going to take place. And so you have to get them involved early on. The problem is, I mean, that sounds good, but you have to give them the tools to help them visualize what it is. So this is where your 3D representation models and goggles and so on, where you have them walk through it. And then also you do things like saying, you realize that if you make a decision to change this access, it's going to cost the project an additional $300,000 if you make that decision based on a walkthrough of the facility. So you really want to calibrate them to the importance of making sure they have their head on straight as early as possible so the change orders don't take place. So Rebecca.
Yeah, Rebecca, the numbers that are in the cost model are for the whole life cycle. So I think we have some data that says the back end maybe where a lot of it's caught, but as Red just said, the intent is to say, well, how do we give teams the right knowledge and visualization up front so that we catch them before they hit the field, right? We catch them in engineering. Because I think we all have those reviews in our work process, but obviously they're not effective, right, if we're still making changes in the back end because we couldn't visualize it in the front end. So it's for the whole flow.
Yeah, and then
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and so the change, it's interesting. Like there's a I recall a success enabler that talks about and this is for an EPC, do you maintain a list of potential things that are of issues, right? So there's always issues in construction, but but at some point it reaches a head where you say, crap, we have to go get a change order. Well, how do you go about tracking it? And also, how do you go about if you see the same change order come through on multiple projects, why didn't you learn the first time kind of thing? Well, how do you have an environment that does that? So all those things are included in the success enablers. Good. Anything else? Okay. Well, I'm going to thank you very much for attending. I'm going to record this. Really appreciate it. Hopefully the recording will come out in a coherent way. And don't hesitate to call me if you can't access the Voice of the Owner environment. Please let me know, and I'll make sure you can if you're a member of our owner organization. And look forward to seeing you at the Fiatech Forum next month. Okay. Thanks a lot. Take care.